We're gonna just take a little bit in the next, I don't know how long it'll take, 45 minutes, hour, and talk about tips for the trade in doing investigations and specifically interviews. Like I said, I've done a lot of investigations from my days as a UPAC investigator to present day. I contract with districts as an outside investigator sometimes to come in and do investigations. These are things that I have collected over the years. Take them or leave them, but hopefully they will help you in your investigation. Okay, when we're talking about Title IX and the process of conducting a Title IX investigation, the first step, as we've already discussed, is to send both parties notice of an interview, including where the interview will take place, what the interview is intended to cover, and who will be at the interview. Asterisk, note, if you have enough staff, which I know is always a problem in smaller districts, consider having a male and female in all interviews, or at least maybe on an investigative team, because especially when you're talking about allegations of sexual harassment and you're asking kids questions that are pretty sensitive in terms of sexual activity, you may have witnesses and or complainant respondent more comfortable talking to someone of their own gender. One of my favorite, I'll just digression real quick story. When I was a UPAC investigator, I was investigating a case of sexual harassment involving a teacher and a student. And it was in Granite District. Doug Larson's the attorney in Granite, and we decided it made more sense rather than to do a UPAC investigation at the school level to do them together. The school hadn't done the investigation and came to UPAC at the same time it came to the school. So we joined forces and interviewed the girl, the complainant, and her friends together. And when we were together, it became a pattern. Most of us were pretty quiet. And finally, Doug's like, you know what, I'm just going to step out of the room. And he left, and suddenly these girls were like chatty Cathy's, and they were telling me everything. And it became apparent that it was just, they didn't want to tell their sexual escapades to some strange male adult, but they were comfortable telling me. So keep that in mind as you, if possible, and again, I know it's not always possible with staffing limitations, but if possible, consider having someone of the same gender in the interview process. The notice also has to tell the parties that they can bring an advisor, could be a parent, attorney, another trusted adult, not another student. So if you have a student that says, well, my advisor is my best friend, let them know that's not an option. Someone who is an adult, even if they're 18 and still is another student, just make it clear that it can be a parent or an attorney or someone else, but not a friend or colleague here. Also, the notice includes a provision that the party should bring any documents they want the investigator to review, and then that should go out 2 or 3 days in advance. So that is your standard forms in there. Document number, what did I say, 12, 13, goes out 2 or 3 days before the investigation.
Do you have a guideline on, it can be a little frustrating when they might have like 6 advisors.
Right.
I mean,
you only have to allow one.
Okay,
yeah.
So we can limit them to one. I mean, it makes it hard if they want to bring both parents and an attorney.
Yeah.
But man, when they start getting, it's hard.
My recommendation would be to cut it off at 2 parents and an attorney. If they want to be grandma and grandpa and uncle, who's also, a bouncer and or whatever else, just let them know you have a legal right to bring an advisor. Obviously, we'll allow you to bring your parents and an attorney if you want. Okay, so step 2 is the interviews. So you begin by interviewing the parties and the witnesses, interview the complainant. Any interview with the complainant should include some trauma-informed interview techniques, and we're not going to go through those, but I will send a document that I found. I will tell you, I just looked it up and did some little self-study. Law enforcement often get trained in trauma-informed interview practices, and a lot of it, the gist of it is making sure you're not asking questions in a way that suggests the complainant is at fault or that doesn't re-traumatize the complainant. Like I said, I found a little cheat sheet on some law enforcement agency's website and confirmed that that was accurate information by looking at a few others. Put it together, I'll send that to Jason and send it out to you all. It just has some suggestions, maybe ask it this way instead of this way. But the point is, we don't want to re-traumatize someone who has, if they have, experienced something pretty traumatic in the way that we ask questions, and there's ways to do that. Any interview with a respondent should avoid cross-examination style questions or questions intended to intimidate or catch someone in a lie. Remember, you're just getting the student's side of the story, okay? I see a lot of, often HR directors who are new to the job and they're interviewing employees. This is no diss to HR directors, but they know the employee screwed up and they've seen their fair share of law and order. And so they're, sitting there and they're wanting to corner this person. They're asking questions just to see if they're going to lie. And I found it's a better approach to go in truly asking as if you really don't know. You don't have an opinion. Even if you have evidence showing or supporting that the person's lying, just point that out. I have evidence that says this, so tell me why you're telling me this, that. Take detailed notes of your interviews. You can record them, but if you do, let your parties know. It always causes, again, it's not so much of a legal advice as it is practical. People get really upset if they're being recorded without their knowledge. Even though it's legal, it's a one-party consent state, but if a parent finds out that you recorded them and they didn't know about it, that makes them very defensive. Probably does with you too. So if you are going to record, just let them know, I'm recording this, I hope that's okay. You may have a parent that says, well, if you're going to record, I'm going to record. That's fine. Conversely, if you have a parent that says, I'm going to record this conversation, then you should also. Just because you don't want any recording to be sliced and then put together in a way that doesn't accurately reflect what happened. Okay? It's fine to ask if someone's recording, that's okay. I was in another meeting with an attorney and a student and parents, and this attorney was new in town, he's from Los Angeles, he was a big time litigator, that's what he told me. And at the end of our conversation, he said, I have two requests. One had to do with the kid's disciplinary record. I'm like, that's fine. Like, and two, I would like a copy of whatever recording you're making right now. And I'm like, I'm not making a recording. He's like, no, I really want a copy of that recording. And I'm like, look, I'm a school district attorney. Do you understand? We don't want surreptitiously record people saying things that we're going to pull out in some case. And it's a little bit disarming. But anyway, if you suspect the parent might be one of those recorders, you can ask, that's fine, but do it in a way that doesn't, make someone feel accused. Also, a note about recordings. Remember what I said, all evidence has to be exchanged with the other parties. If you have recorded the interview and you keep it and use it and send it to the decision maker, it also should probably be sent to the other party, which you might not always want. I think that that's troubling to share with the respondent an interview that you're having behind closed doors with the complainant. And so if you do record, my recommendation would be use the recording to take notes of your interview after the fact and then delete the recording. Don't keep it. It is not evidence. It's not something that you're using. It is something you're using solely as a memory jogger to help you so that you can focus on the interview and that you don't have to focus on typing. So, just a suggestion. On that same note, if you don't want to record or you feel like it's too much trouble or you'll forget to delete, having two people, if you have the staffing needs, is also helpful to have someone taking notes while someone else is asking questions. It just makes it a little bit easier to focus and someone's taking the notes. Always ask everyone you interview, whether it's a respondent or the complainant or a witness, can you think of anyone else who might have some information relevant to this discussion? However you want to ask it. Is there anyone else you think I should talk to? Okay. Step 3 includes gathering videos. By the way, we're gonna talk more about interviewing and just some tips of interviews specifically, but this is more investigation procedures all throughout. So step 3 would be gathering evidence, documents, and other physical, and this doesn't have to be in chronological order. It's not like you have to interview everybody before you go to any evidence, but you're gonna be collecting all of it. Ask for a copy of police report. If it's a Snapchat that someone's describing, ask if they took a copy of it or photographed it on their phone. Often kids do that. Again, watch security cameras. Review any text messages or social media posts that kids mention and give to you. Remembering, however, that you do not ever request a student send you photos of nudes. Okay, you don't ever want to get in the position of being accused of soliciting or possessing something that could be child pornography. So if you're dealing with something involving nude photos on a student's electronic device, get your law enforcement involved and let them handle it. They may or may not prosecute, but at least you're not taking possession of that photo. You can take the phone from the student and put it in maybe a sealed bag or something where you document on a note or tell someone this is what I'm doing with this, and then call law enforcement. Pull class schedules if relevant, look at disciplinary logs. So those are the kinds of documentary evidence that you're going to want to look at. Not all evidence is going to tell you definitively yes or no this happened or it didn't happen. A lot of evidence might just be circumstantial or even tangential. For example, say a student witness claims to have seen Andy grope Charlie inappropriately during the group photo of their choir class. Ask for the group photo, okay? It's unlikely that the group photo is going to show Andy actually groping Charlie, but it will show you, it will show where the student witness was in relation to Andy and Charlie, and will give you a sense of whether or not it was even possible for the witness to have witnessed it. Or maybe Andy and Charlie are on the other sides of the picture. And this is what the witness is telling you, right? That's not even possible. So even though a piece of evidence might not say, yes, this happened, I'm looking at what I'm being told is happening, it will give you, it could give you information that will support or undermine the credibility of a witness or one of the parties. Gathering evidence should be happening throughout the process. Again, if anyone, including the parties or the witnesses, mention something that might be documented somewhere, again, text, a message on some sort of social media platform, Instagram post, ask for a copy of that unless it's a nude, right? Okay. It may not be relevant to gather it now, sort it out later. Okay, okay, let's talk now about the interview. Just some, again, tips of the trade, how to conduct an interview that gives you the best and most accurate information in a way that creates a feeling of safety for your students. This is not a comfortable thing for kids to be talking to adults about something that happened to them, especially something of a sexual nature. So create a safe space. Consider having comfort items wherever it is you're interviewing. It might be in your office, it might be at the district, it might be somewhere else, if it's possible, and this isn't always possible, but consider just having a blanket or Kleenexes, water, trying to make the interviewees comfortable. And this is not just the complainant. This is because we are treating everybody equitably, anyone who comes in to talk to you. Consider avoiding confrontation. And again, none of these are laws, okay? So you do not have to comply with any of these things. These are just suggestions. Oftentimes we sit across from someone, it can become very confrontational. Sometimes sitting next to someone might make them more uncomfortable. So read the room. As administrators, you guys know better than I how kids operate these days. It's been years since I've been in the classroom. So understand what your kids are telling you through what they're not saying. Begin with an explanation about the interview, build some rapport. Ask them how they're doing, how the school year is going, what classes they're interested in, just sort of decreasing the tension in the room. And then explain the process and why you are interviewing the person. For the complainant, allow the student to tell you what happened. Just open it up. So tell me what happened. Okay? For the witnesses, say something like, the reason we're here, or the reason you're here, is we're investigating some allegations raised by a classmate, and I understand you might have some information that would be helpful to our investigation. Start by, do you know so-and-so? Or did you see anything that happened in this class if you have already confirmed that these kids are in the same class? For the respondent, maybe something like, so the reason you're here is because we're investigating allegations raised by a classmate that you blame. It's already in the notice of allegations that that person has received, so this should be no surprise. They've got a notice of allegations and a notice of an interview. So there is no surprise, but starting out saying, this is why we're here is a good idea. Some administrators like to say, do you know why you're here? And that's fine too. You know, do you understand why we're talking today? And the respondent will just, yeah, it's because so-and-so said I did this, or because I did this. That's okay too. And again, we're trying to find out exactly what, if anything, happened. Avoid these kind of interrogations. I'm going to play you a favorite part if I can make it work. Might not work. Okay, if you haven't seen this, there's this great scene here where I don't know, Tom Cruise is the attorney for, he's a JAG officer, the attorney for military, and he's interviewing Nicholson, what's the same? Yeah, Jack Nicholson, thank you. And he's on a stand, and he, it's, did you order the code red? And he gets really red in his face, and of course his response is, you want the truth, you can't handle the truth. I know it's exciting and it's really dramatic, but just avoid those kind of Hollywood moments. You're that attorney who's not licensed and saying, did you rape this girl? It's just never a good practice. Again, cross-examination techniques are not going to get you the best information. You're not trying to catch someone in a lie. You're truly trying to understand what happened. Okay? And if it's not making sense and that the person telling you the information, whether it's the complainant, respondent, witnesses, is all over the place and none of what they say really corroborates, just tell them. I'm having a hard time making sense of what you're saying, or I'm having a hard time, like you said this and now you said this, can you help me understand why? You don't have to, again, try to undermine. Like I said, when evidence you have contradicts something a witness is saying, it's okay to say, here's what I know so far, based on certain evidence, but you're saying something different, so there's something I'm missing here. When interviewing students, ask them to put their phones on the desk so they can't text or communicate with other students to corroborate what's happening. That's just a good practice anytime you're doing any sort of investigation. Avoid interruptions, and it's okay to allow pauses with encourage communication. Don't be afraid of the silence. Surprising how many people, I think not just students, but people, adults, will start talking to fill the silence, right? So you just pause and just let it sit for a second. People will start talking. Again, avoid inflammatory words and phrases like victim, perpetrator, when you're having these interviews, especially because it just sets a tone and sends a message as to what you think and who you are more likely to believe. Ask open-ended questions, so what, where, when, and how. What happened? What was said? What was said before, after? What did you see or hear? What happened before and after? Who was involved? Who else heard? These are really important when you're first interviewing the respondent and complainant, because you're going to want to follow up with the who's. Okay, so who saw, who heard, who was there, who could have seen or heard. When did it happen? Oftentimes kids don't have any sense of time. I don't know, a couple weeks ago, 2 days ago, a year ago. And if they don't remember, try to nail it down with, was it during spring semester? Or were you in band during the time? And if they weren't in band in fall, was it during football season? Was it when it was cold outside? Was it around Christmas time? So help them by connecting it to other things that were going on. And the how, not so much like tell me how it came about, but what all of the details that led up to the circumstances. Be careful with the why. You don't want to ever ask a complainant, why did this happen to you? Because that could suggest to them, well, I don't know, maybe I did something wrong. You could ask, why do you think that the respondent is saying, or the complainant is saying this, if the respondent tells you it's a lie, it never happened. It's appropriate to say, why do you think the complainant will lie? It's appropriate to say to the complainant, why do you think the respondent would say these things? But be careful just in saying, well, why did this happen to you? In the way that suggests it might be someone's fault. Consider avoiding the back-to-back interviews where you send one kid back to class and tell that kid, hey, call Johnny down now, because then everyone knows who's being interviewed and kids might talk and kids are going to see who's involved. Avoid expressing sympathy for the complainant. Things like, wow, that really sucks. Well, what else did you do? Seriously, she did that during class? It is nice for a complainant to feel heard, but you can do that without suggesting that you have already made up your mind about what happened. Okay? And I've heard interviews. I was actually representing a respondent in one instance, which I usually don't work with teachers and employees, principals, mostly I work with districts, but one instance I was working with the principal who had been accused of sexual harassment, and we got a copy of the interviews that the district had with all of the employees, and I mean, no fault, again, this is a great district and great people, but a lot of the questions were, wow, and not just questions, but were interspersed with comments like, I can't believe you did that. Oh my gosh, that's awful. You know, that's totally inappropriate. With all this commentary that just encouraged the complainants in their testimony, and whether or not it happened, I felt like it was an unfair approach that tainted the interview process. So be careful about that. Ask questions in a straightforward, non-accusatory manner, and don't ask leading questions like, did you see Sarah touch John under his pants? Instead, were you in science class on October 25th? Did you see or notice anything happening between Sarah and John? Can you tell me what happened? Let the person give you the information. And the more information you have, the more narrow your questioning can be, right? Don't lead with, so did you see Sarah assault John in class? But as you're having the conversation with the witness, and she tells you, yeah, something happened, and I saw something going on under the desk, you could say, the allegation is that John touched Sarah. Did you see that? But wait till you have more information that the witness has given to you before you give the witness basically what they're supposed to say or not say. Okay? So that's how to maybe conduct a safe interview, safe atmosphere. Conducting a timely investigation is important too. Parties and witnesses should be interviewed as soon as possible. Again, this sometimes isn't an option when law enforcement's involved, but to the extent that you can get in and start this process, the sooner the better, because like adults, kids forget things and our memories fade. Solicit witness lists from the people you talked to. Who saw the incident? Who did you tell about the incident? Whose names have you heard in connection with the incident? And then contact those individuals and get them in for an interview as soon as possible. In terms of getting the most accurate information, here are some tips. When witnesses write a statement after telling you what happened, because sometimes you like to interview them and then you're going to say, here, will you write down what you just told me? That's fine, but review the written statement before you send the student back to class to make sure it lines up. I was involved in a situation, not a sexual harassment case, but a case involving something a teacher said in class. The teacher had a foul potty mouth and kept dropping the F word. And the HR was investigating, and the principal did a great job of talking to the teacher, or excuse me, talking to the students and getting statements. But at the end of the day, when we were moving towards a termination hearing, I'm looking at the witness statements and looking at the principal's notes of her interviews with the students, and they didn't line up. There would be one student who said something to the principal and wrote something totally different. And I'm like, oh, this is a problem. Because now I've got to go to a hearing, and I have this witness statement, and I have the principal testifying something, and they don't line up. And sometimes it's not the kids are intentionally lying, but they just forget a key fact, or they might remember something and when they're writing down, they don't recall having told you. So just take a second, read through their statement, and if there's inconsistencies with what they just told you, say, hey, this is different than what you told me. I want to make sure I have this right. I know some districts, and this is definitely not required, but some districts that I've done investigations for have it written into their policy that every time you interview a witness, the witness should have a chance to review their statement. So I interview, take notes, type up a summary of the statement, and send that to the witness and say, did I get this right? And sometimes the witness writes back and says, well, you got most of it right, but there's this piece. And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, that's what I said. You don't have to do that, it takes longer, but just, again, something to think about. Consider the age of the student and whether having students write his or her own statement is effective rather than having them tell you and you writing it down, okay? When taking notes, try to write exactly what the person said rather than to characterize it after the fact. For example, Terry said that Jerry yelled, "Get off of me," to Carrie. Don't write, "Jerry told Carrie to get off of him." Write down what they actually told you, okay? Anytime an interviewee mentions the names of another student who was present or may have heard, follow up. I was reviewing an investigative report for a district where the investigators, they finished their investigation, they'd written up the report, were about to send the report to the other parties, and there were all sorts of references. It was one of those he said, she said, he said it was all two boys, but one totally denied it, one was certain it happened. And in the interviews, it said, referenced other students who were there, or just who had, the kids in their conversation said, well, so-and-so, I was standing next to so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so. But the first so-and-so and the second so-and-so were never interviewed. Right? That's pretty important, especially if you have a question of whether it happened and you have someone who potentially saw or could have seen. Follow up with those students. Anytime an interviewee tells you something that can be verified, for example, I was out of class that day because I had a doctor's appointment, so I couldn't have slapped that kid on the butt that day. Verified. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. Maybe the complainant got the day wrong, right? But if there's no question that the complainant was like, it was absolutely on this day, it was picture day, I remember for a fact because after I got my picture taken, I was so traumatized by what happened, I had to go home, and maybe it was before pictures and I missed picture day, whatever. So if there's 100% certainty that it happened on picture day, and yet the respondent wasn't even in school on picture day, and they're telling you that, it can be verified by your attendance records, go to your attendance records. Okay? Check out those things. Right?
Question.
Yeah.
If there's a large group of people who witnessed an event, do you need to interview them all, or is there just a point where you say, I've got enough?
Great question. So those of you who didn't hear in the back, if you have a large group of people who witnessed the event, do you have to interview every single one of them? No. Your job is to get evidence sufficient to support a finding of responsibility. And if that is 2 or 3 out of the 10 witnesses that you find credible, and you don't have anyone that was there that says it didn't happen, you're fine. What's difficult is when you have 10 witnesses, 5 say it happened, 5 say it didn't happen. And those 5 just might not have seen it. But there might be 5 that said, I was standing right there, I was talking to this respondent the entire time, there's no way that he could have done that, or that she could have done it. That's harder. But if everyone's story is that, yeah, I thought it happened, you don't have to interview every single student. Anytime a witness says something that is contradictory, ask for clarification. For example, yeah, I saw Johnny touching Isaac inappropriately. I was standing right there playing soccer, and I heard Isaac say, hey, don't do that. And I turned around, and Isaac was pushing Johnny away from him. This is taken directly from a report I reviewed. On the one hand, what's contradictory about that? Let's see if you guys can figure it out.
Saw the touching, but then he had to turn around.
Exactly. On the one hand, he says, yeah, I saw him. And then as he started to explain it, he's talking about hearing it, and he turns around, and what he saw was Isaac pushing him off, but he didn't see it. And so that leads me to believe, well, I don't know what to believe. Can you help me understand that? You just said that you saw it, but you didn't. So can you tell me what that, explain that. You also would want to follow up on the word inappropriately. What does that mean to you? What do you mean when you say inappropriately? Some kids are uncomfortable, I don't know, inappropriately. I'm asking, you need to be a little bit more specific. Yeah.
I guess I need a little more on the, I like your suggestion on that first bullet, check, especially if you're talking to witnesses.
Yeah.
We have had some issues, and it's not necessarily Title IX specific, but just in investigations of personnel, or where the complainant, or they'll say something. Well, it's the respondent usually. They'll even admit, yeah, I did it. Then they go talk to an attorney, or talk to a parent, or talk to someone, and then we had one literally this last 3 months ago. It was a personnel investigation where they said, I can't remember what I said. can you guys give me a copy? I'm like, sure, we're happy to give you a copy of our notes. But it was almost like they wanted to change their story, and we had 2 witnesses. I don't, does that happen, like, I think it's a good practice,
Yeah,
but it's when you get down to the nitty gritty, sometimes they'll, and this person, I believe them, they probably didn't know. It was a stressful time for them, they can't remember exactly how they said it, but yet, the reason they were asking was because they wanted to find fault.
right.
You know, make sure, I don't know, that's why we always have at least 2.
Great reason to have 2. Another reason to have the person write it down. When it comes to the parties, they're going to see their statements, right? Because they're going to see, or at least the summary of what they said, because you have to give them, each other, all of the information, summaries. And so if at that point you have a respondent who says, that's not at all what I said in that interview, you know, and pushes back and has their attorney call the investigator and say, that is not what was said in the interview, that could be problematic. That's why it might be a good idea to either have a written statement or immediately after you summarize it, call them up and say, is this an accurate reflection? If the investigator is pretty sure this is what was said and now you're changing your story, then my recommendation would be to have the respondent or whoever it is come back in and say, well, let's interview again. Are you saying that this is not what you said? Because at this time, you're just still investigating, right? There's no adjudication. There's no cross-examination, perjury. It's just maybe the respondent said one thing and now they're saying that's not what I meant. Your job as an investigator is to take whatever they say they meant before it gets to the decision-making process. And if they're saying, well, I said that, but I changed my mind, you can absolutely note that in the investigative report. We did an interview on this day, and this day, this is what he said this time. This is what was said the second time. The person changed their mind. Decision makers, you figure out what that means. Leave some time between interviews to review your notes, and again, possibly type up a summary of what was said by the interviewee. You don't have to, but just looking through, okay, did I get everything? Do I need to call this person back down? And remember the goals of the interview. Learn the facts, establish a timeline, understand each party's perception, try to develop an understanding of what is more likely than not to have happened. You don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. You just have to decide, yeah, I think this probably happened, and figure out why you think that, at least for decision makers. Listen carefully, adapt follow-up questions. It's okay to have a script when you go in to interview kids of things that you want to learn, but if someone tells you something that isn't right in line with your script, adapt. You've got to follow up. Tell me what you mean by that. Oh wait, she said that she heard him say what? And then follow up those questions. Ask clarifying questions about terms that can have multiple meanings or a spectrum of meanings, like a few, a couple. A few to some people is 4. A few to some people is 12. So ask people to put a number to whatever description or adjective they're using. Yelling and screaming, I think, is one of the most commonly I'm going to say misinterpreted, but it has probably the widest spectrum of any word I've heard. When I was doing UPAC investigations, it was always, this teacher was yelling at me. Like, what does that mean to you exactly? And you don't have to have them identify a decibel level, but just, can you tell me what the person's face looks like? You may want to get others, witnesses, to corroborate, was this person yelling in your opinion? You know, what does yelling look like or sound like to you? Again, that word appropriate, inappropriate touching, bullying, harassing, things that kids throw around a lot. Like, what does that mean to you? Can you describe that a little bit more specifically? Ask witnesses for everything they saw, heard, and any other direct sensory perception. Then it's okay to ask for their opinion. You can say, why do you think that this person might have been lying, if that's what you're saying? These can be indicators of other places to look. When the interviewee can't remember when exactly something happened, ask questions that may trigger. We talked about that already. So things that they can associate with in terms of context. Keep a poker face to the best of your ability. Avoid rolling your eyes or, being like, oh, excuse me. Any other body language that might suggest that you don't believe the person. Repeat what you're hearing them say in a non-judgmental, inquisitive way. Am I correct in that this is what you're trying to tell me? Is this accurate? Ask open-ended questions that aren't simply answered with a yes or no, unless you're asking and restating what the person just said. It's okay to ask yes or no as foundational, just to make sure that's clear. So when you're saying something, for example, were you in class today? Is respondent in your class? Because you're just trying to make sure you understand that this witness actually does have a basis for the information they're providing to you before you just jump in and start asking them questions. Okay? Do you know the respondent? Do you know the complainant? Are you friends with the complainant confiding in you? Has the complainant confided in you about something that's happened? Get details. Where were you sitting in relation to the respondent, the complainant? Especially if they're telling you about something they observed during a class where the parties were seated. Who was sitting next to the respondent on the left, on the right, front and back? What was going on in class that day? Where was the teacher? Did the teacher say anything? Not all of these questions are going to be directly relevant to the question of whether it happened, but you're going to get a better sense of the credibility of the witnesses as you get the details about what's happening. Okay? By the end of your interviews, you should have enough information to recreate the entire scene through a screenplay, complete with stage directions. Okay? I've had some investigators that I've worked with write up the class diagram of where everybody was sitting. And there were 4 different diagrams based on the several witnesses that they spoke to. Because one student said, I was sitting next to Tina and Tony. And then another witness said, I was sitting next to Tina and Tony and across from Brittany. And Brittany said, I was sitting next to Tina and Tony. Not everybody was next to Tina and Tony. And the investigator, in doing the best she could, drafted up like 5 diagrams. This is where everybody says they were sitting. Like, you could, there's a clear answer. This is not open to interpretation. Somebody was sitting between Tina and Tony. And you can get that information. Maybe the teacher has a seating chart, maybe not. But if you're getting contradictory information and you can't script the setting on stage, then go back and get more information. You should be able to identify where people are sitting and standing, what they're saying, what their line is, and when they're saying it. And again, in a perfect world, everyone has perfect recollection of everything that happened. But the idea is you're going to get people's perception from 10 different angles, and all together, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what happened. So that's the goal. Again, there might be pieces missing, but that's the goal, to recreate the scene by having everybody staged in your head. Always ask at the conclusion, is there anything else you think we should know or anyone else you think we should talk to? Okay, any questions on interview tips, investigation, tactics? Okay, we're gonna take just a few minutes and talk about assessing credibility and reliability, and then we'll jump into our scenario. We'll give you a 5-minute break before we do that. So what if there are no witnesses to the conduct, and it is a he said, she said, she said, she said, he said, situation, right? Is it a lost cause? At that point you say, there's no way to determine this, so we're done. It is rare to have a case where you cannot land on one side or the other. This is like making my ear do weird things, so I'm just gonna hold it for a second. It's like if I'm playing and the pressure is like going in and out. I don't know, it's never happened before with the microphone, but I'll just hold it. You do have to land on one side or the other, and if you don't have enough information to make the determination that whatever the allegation is happened, then the side you're landing on is not responsible or insufficient information. Credibility is often the factor that pushes you to one side or the other. In other words, who is credible? That doesn't mean that anyone's lying. So, and I hope, you work with kids enough to know that everybody has a different recollection of what happened. Anyone who's ever been in any kind of relationship with a member of the opposite sex knows that you're going to have different recollections of the same event. Doesn't mean anybody's lying, it just means there's different ways to look at things, okay? And different ways that we remember things. As an investigator, you need to include the details to allow a decision maker to weigh credibility evidence. For example, Carla reports that Rita touched Carl on the genitals and butt while making sexual comments to him during PE. Carl reports that Wayne and Winona might be helpful witnesses because they were in the same PE class. You know how I've got Carl's the complainant, Rita's the respondent, and Wayne and Winona are witnesses. It keeps it clear for you. So you interview Wayne and Winona, and they didn't see or hear anything. Does this mean that it didn't happen? Or that it's not true, you're done? No, not necessarily. You're gonna have to find out, did Wayne and Winona not see or hear anything because they weren't anywhere in the vicinity? Or is it because nothing happened? So you gotta follow up on some of those. In this situation, ask yourself, is it plausible, so this is plausibility, is it plausible? Is there any way that this could have happened? That Carl's report is true, and Wayne and Winona simply did not hear it or see it. Is that even plausible? For example, was the gym loud? Maybe if it was so loud, Wayne and Winona might not have heard anything. Were Wayne and Winona close to Carl and Rita? Were they standing anywhere near them during the gym class? Or were they on the other side of the gym? No one has seen anything. What was going on in class? Were kids goofing off, not paying attention, or was everyone quiet and attentive when the incident allegedly occurred? Because if everyone was quiet and attentive when the incident allegedly occurred, and Wayne and Winona were nearby, they would have seen something or heard something, more likely. Ask these follow-up questions to Winona and Wayne, and if necessary, go back to Carl and ask him follow-up questions. Describe the scene to me. Where were you in relation to Rita, Winona, Wayne? What was going on in the background? Was it loud? Was it quiet? Is there a reason that nobody heard this? Because if it was pretty quiet and nobody heard anything that the complainant is saying was being told to him, kind of raises questions of credibility. Okay? Remember, avoid asking questions that are leading and suggest the answer you're looking for. Also avoid asking complainant, how is it possible that no one saw anything? Because that suggests that you don't believe the complainant. Consider the source opportunity when you are interviewing witnesses. The source opportunity means, how did the witness learn the information? If it was first-hand, could the witness have seen or heard what they claim to have seen or heard? Is that possible? Where are they getting their information? So if you interview a witness and the witness tells you, oh yeah, Carl absolutely was assaulted by Rita. How do you know that information? Did you see that? Did Carl tell you about it? Did Carl tell Timmy, who told Tanya, who told you? So just ask where the source of the information came from. And if it is secondhand, then get that person in and ask that person. Okay? Source motive. Does the witness have a reason to lie? It's very important in your investigative report to identify the relationship between your witnesses and the complainant respondent. I interviewed Joe. Joe is respondent's best friend since childhood. That doesn't mean that Joe's lying. It just means that if Joe tells you there's no way respondent did this, you're going to take that with the understanding that Joe is best friends with the respondent. That's all. And that may or may not give Joe a reason to be less than truthful. It may also not have anything to do with Joe's testimony. But those are things you're going to want to consider. Is the witness close friends, or does the witness have a negative history with one of the parties? Is there a vested interest in the outcome, or will there be a negative impact on the witness? Say the witness was there and everybody was smoking, and while everybody was smoking and drinking, something happened and the witness observed it. But if the witness tells you what they observed, that's going to implicate them in something that has nothing to do with sex, but could also be some misconduct. So maybe the witness is like, I wasn't even there. I don't know what happened. Consider that if you tell me this, you could get in trouble. You're not going to get in trouble for what you're telling me right here and now. Can you tell me what, maybe consider that as you ask questions. Source status. How credible is the source based on the status? Is a teacher with no dog in the fight going to be more credible than a student with a history of lying and insubordination? Probably. You're going to interview employees as well. And I will say that most of the time, employees, because they're not in the middle of these situations, are going to tell you what they saw and heard without lying. I mean, they might have a reason to misstate what happened, but consider the source of your information in terms of their credibility, just as in terms of their role in the school. Okay, should we take a quick break before we jump into the scenario? You guys all look like you could be standing up, keep your blood pumping. Let's be back at your 1:15. Does that work?